Who is this guy here? If you guessed Robert Frost from the title, then you'd be wrong, because this is Robert Frost. And the aim of this video is to give you an understanding about this guy. We're going to go through just a brief contextual understanding of our prescribed text poet, Robert Frost, and just the main details for what you need to know about him to kind of understand his poems in a bit more detail. Now, the main aim for me in this video is to try and get you to understand that Robert Frost is not some person who we cannot connect with. Just because he's passed away 50 or 60 years ago doesn't mean that we can't connect with him, that we can't understand his poetry, because a lot of his poetry deals with themes and ideas that are still relevant today and will always be relevant. He touches on issues such as relationships, human relationships, and how they can be complicated and messy and misunderstood, but also very exciting. And he also deals with the experience of encountering nature and how beautiful it is, and how sometimes in our modern society we don't have enough opportunities to connect with the world that's around us, and therefore we're kind of missing something. So I hope that you just get an appreciation for how wonderful this poet is at expressing experiences, and hopefully that you'll find some sort of relationship between your understanding of the poems and your own life. But let's get into it. So what I'm going to do is just go through some basic contextual information, and then after that I'm going to explain why I think that it's important, and hopefully try to connect it to some of the poetry things that we're learning. Now, I recommend that you go through and study Robert Frost in your own time. Maybe do a quick Google search and try and find some good websites to find out some more information about him, or just to read up a little bit more about him. I'll give you as much as I think that you'll need, but finding out a few extra things might actually help you bring some interesting points to discussion in class. So let's get into it. The basics. He was born in 1874 and he died in 1963. Now, why is this important? Well, he lived through some of the most challenging and dangerous times in human history. We've got World War I, we've got the Great Depression of the 1920s, and we've got World War II as well. So he's living in quite a challenging time for human history, and therefore that has definitely influenced his poetry and the way that he sees the world. Point number two is that he's an American poet who lived most of his life in the rural area of New England in America. And based on the name, you probably guessed that New England was one of the first areas where English people settled into America, the Great Land. And the place is known mainly for its farming and its rural lifestyle. So there's no big major cities compared to the cities of New York or Los Angeles, but they're really known for their farms. And why is this important? Well, he grew up in this area, and therefore his outlook on his world is going to be completely different to ours. We live in suburbia and we're surrounded by houses and lots of other people. We buy our food from the supermarket, and obviously Robert Frost did not have that upbringing. He would be farming his own food, and he'd be quite reliant on what the land would bring to him. And that's going to give us a unique perspective that we probably haven't understood before because we haven't been in his situation. Point number three, he's won the Pulitzer Prize 4 times. Why is this important? Well, he's the only person ever to win 4 times. The Pulitzer Prize is one of the most well-known and regarded achievements that a poet or any writer can accomplish, and the fact that he's done it 4 times, and he's the only one to do it 4 times, suggests that he probably knows what he's talking about, and he's probably good at what he does. So we're going to be learning from one of the greats in history. Now, some points about his style of poetry. Number 1, his style is usually deceptively simple, but it contains multiple levels of meaning, and you have to look at both the literal and metaphorical meanings of his poems to truly understand it. Why is this important? Well, you're not going to understand the full detail and purpose of a poem from Frost unless you look at both of these levels. On the outside, you'll see quite a simple poem that is easy to understand. That's what I meant by deceptive simplicity. And it'll be about a single situation where somebody encounters something in nature or somebody else, and the poem's quite easy to read. But beyond that, there are subtle metaphors and symbols that are used to really play with meaning and really communicate something else that you have to kind of decode. And that's what is awesome about studying poetry, is that you're able to get your own understanding and your own meaning from the text, not just being told what to think and what to believe. 2, he's a romanticist poet. Poetry that deals with nature and human experience and feelings is often known as romantic poetry, and it's an era of time where artists basically were becoming more in touch with their feelings and emotions and nature, when it had been lost in the era before, in the Enlightenment period. And basically the Enlightenment was kind of the opposite, I guess, from Romanticism, where it was focused on logic and science and figuring things out. So the Romanticists were kind of going against that trend, because humankind was losing its connections with the things that are really awesome, our feelings and nature and all those things that are around us. So his poetry is going to be focused around those themes of nature and experience, which I've mentioned before. 3, for his style, he uses a lot of metaphorical language, a lot of images, and a lot of comparisons to explore some complex themes. Why is this important? Well, we need to know language techniques and how to identify them and how to decode their effect if we're going to fully understand what he is saying about themes that he's mentioning in the poem, and also, of course, our concept of discovery, which we're going to be finding out. 4, he uses structure, rhythm, and form creatively to enhance meaning. So it's not just the language techniques that are important, but it is also the way that he uses structure and the way that he plays with rhythm and the way that he plays with form to communicate something through that. And we'll be looking at that in detail, because a lot of his poetry does use that. 5, in terms of his poetry style, he often starts with an everyday experience and then relates it to a thought, a belief, an idea, or a reflection. And I think the rain's just started, so hopefully you can still hear over me. But his poems, again, deceptively simple, and they start with an everyday experience, but then they link to some other thought, some sort of inner feeling that he wants to communicate or that he's had in this moment. So we then can do the same as Frost. When we have an everyday experience, like going to the shops, we can apply the same approach that Frost does and have our own inner experience and start to think about the people that are around us, or start to think about the situations that happen, and therefore have our own, I guess, Frostian experience of the way that he sees the world. And if we can understand his poetry, then we can probably better understand the world that is around us, not just his world. So that's it for the major contextual elements. I hope that you've taken some good notes. And again, I recommend that you do your own research, search in YouTube, search in Google for some stuff on Robert Frost, just to gain a better understanding of who this guy is. And I guarantee that it will really help your understanding of his poetry. So we're done.